Thank you. Our next speaker, that brings us, we've spent now 45 minutes. We started 5 minutes early, that's why I'm ending it now. Although we should start with 11:45, but we're a couple of minutes ahead of our program. Everybody does still have 45 minutes, so thank you for Dr. Shumagan for staying within his time frame. Now, the next speaker is Professor Michel Clasquin from UNIS, and I'll introduce him just now. He will be talking on the conceptualization of morality in Buddhism. So thank you for joining us and preparing your paper on that topic. A short word of introduction to Professor Clasquin is that Professor Clasquin is a professor in the Department of Religion Studies and Arabic at the University of South Africa. He is a C3 NRF-rated researcher. He completed his PhD in religion studies at UNISA in the year 2000 with a thesis entitled Transplanting Buddhism, an investigation into the spread of Buddhism with reference to Buddhism in South Africa. His promoter was Professor Kobus Kruger. Thank you, Professor Clasquin, for your paper.
Kan ek ook vra of almal okay is met foto's neem vir die konferensie as ek foto's neem?
Okay, while Professor Clasquin is coming, we would like to take photographs. Is everybody comfortable with having their face on a photograph? As we're sitting here from time to time, the organizers would like to just take a photograph. If you do not prefer, please just put a paper in front of your face. Thank you, sir.
Still morning. Good morning, everybody. Okay, I'm going to start off with a little thought experiment. Now, you are a Jewish, Christian, or Muslim thinker in Thailand or Mongolia. One day, the local university asks you to come to speak to a predominantly Buddhist audience on the topic of your tradition's attitude towards, let's say, the first level of meditation, also known as infinity of space. Now, it's always nice to be included, but what are you supposed to tell them? Sure, your tradition has its own meditative traditions, and you cast around, you can find a rough analog to what your audience wants to hear. That's the best you can do. Your entire vocabulary is different. It expresses different priorities. Welcome to my world. At least this meeting is going to be a little bit easier than some I've done. Once I was asked to talk about Buddhist spirituality, you have no idea what a contradiction that is. To a Buddhist, the word spirituality just reeks of dualism. But what can I do? I didn't want to insult my hosts. Still, this should be a little easier because morality is universal. Well, Buddhists don't really talk about morality. Ethics, yes. We talk a lot about ethics. There's a whole journal called the Journal of Buddhist Ethics. There's a small library of books about Buddhist ethics. Morality, not so much. Now, there's a reason we don't use that word in Buddhism, and I've decided I'm not going to get into that, because the reason we make that distinction and use the one, not the other, is not going to be the reason other people make the distinction, and then we just get sidetracked. So I am going to use the words interchangeably, and I'm really hoping that my fellow Buddhist scholars are going to forgive me for this. Right. But this conference is not just about Buddhism. Now, if this was not even about the religions, there are lots of conferences where I could just dig into the scriptures, pick up some juicy quotes, it can all go up. Here we are talking about some more factors. We want to take the last 2 centuries of science, scientific advances, seriously. Morality was not invented by the Buddha, by Jesus, or by Aristotle. morality, ethics existed before them. And these great people codified it, they channeled it into certain directions, but there must have been something there already. So the people who lived and died a century before the Buddha, they were not involved in a war of all against all, as Thomas Hobbes would have us believe. They were living their lives and trying to deal with each other. So as far as we can see, as far as you go back, it's there already. Right, where was I? Okay, so to explain Buddhist morality in terms of that, we need to construct something new. An understanding of Buddhism informed by evolution. I fear my fellow Buddhist scholars will be much less forgiving once I start going that way. Practicing Buddhists, however, are unlikely to object. Consider the Tibetan Buddhist community in exile. So about 15 years ago, Dalai Lama approached Emory University and he said, my monks are now living here and they know nothing. Now they get these Western converts and they ask, what do you think about the Big Bang? What do you think about evolution? And the monks are, oh, I don't know. And so in recent years, together with Emory University, in monastic training centers all over the world, a few quick Science for the Absolute Beginner courses are now compulsory for all Tibetan Buddhist monks. And so we can hardly do worse. All right. I'll ask you a simple question. Is it more immoral, more unethical, more sinful to kill an elephant or an ant? Now you can give a number of reasons for whatever you say. You could say, well, according to Kantian deontology, you know, we wouldn't want everybody to be an elephant killer. We wouldn't want to universalize it, but if everybody steps on an ant, well, it wouldn't make that much of a difference. Yeah. That's one way to make the Kantian argument. It's not the only one. You could be a utilitarian and try to calculate which of those acts have to bring the most happiness to the largest number of people. Not so much the largest number of elephants and ants, that usually gets left out, but you can be a Aristotelian virtue ethicist, and you can say, well, there are these intrinsically good virtues, and now let's weigh that up against these acts. Okay, I think I've covered most of the major theories there. Now I'll give you the Buddhist reason why killing an ant is less consequential, less sinful, less immoral than killing an elephant. Killing an elephant takes more effort. So the degree of culpability is not measured by the act's effect on society or on the environment. It is not caused by a mystical innate wrongness that's part of the act itself. What matters is the effect it has on you, the actor. When you kill, you become a killer. When you steal, you become a thief. killer of elephants has taken more effort than the careless stepper on an ant. It is therefore more of a killer. Every time it becomes less of a moral problem to take the life of yet another elephant. Acts, whether they are mental, verbal, or physical, accumulatively affect your character. This is what's commonly referred to as karma. Now, there's no cosmic accounting agency keeping track of what you have done and what rewards or punishments you deserve for it. All happens within the bundle of thoughts, emotions, intentions, and awareness that we conventionally refer to as you. Now, the effects of Buddhist ethics on Buddhists doesn't actually look that different. It's the underlying rationalization that is unique. So, the lay Buddhist will normally take 5 vows after taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, which is the teacher, the community, and the teacher, the teaching, and the community. This takes place in a ceremony in front of at least one monk. The aspiring Buddhist recites either in a liturgical or a modern language, "I undertake the training precept to abstain from onslaught on breathing beings. I undertake the training precept to abstain from taking what is not given. I undertake the training precept to abstain from misconduct concerning sense pleasures. I undertake the training precept to abstain from false speech. I undertake the training precept to abstain from alcoholic drink or drugs that are an opportunity for heedlessness." It sounds much better in the Pali language. Translated into 21st century English, rather than this 19th century English, no killing, no stealing, keep it in your pants, don't get drunk, and don't lie. Okay, so this, sounds pretty universal. Okay, so that is for lay monks. Now, if you want to become a monk, then there are a few more training precepts. 227 of them in total. Now, this could take a while, so I'm not going to read them out to you. Oh, and if you want to become a nun, there are 311. But what interests us here is the phrasing. They are not the Buddhist equivalent of the 10 Commandments, absolute commands laid down by the Buddha. They are rules of training, voluntary undertakings based on the Buddha's recommendations. There's an expectation that by following these training precepts, one will train oneself to become a specific kind of person. Not yet a Buddha, that takes far more effort, but at least one who's able to take that next step that brings one closer to Buddhahood. So these 5 rules are, well, you can think of them like the honesty declaration, that we make our students sign. I know what plagiarism is. I will not plagiarize. And this is followed by a page from Wikipedia that I wrote 5 years ago. And so, like our students, Buddhists don't always follow these rules to perfection. Please do not misunderstand me. So, that is, that's ethics. Is that all? In East Asian Mahayana Buddhism, we enter another layer on top of this very basic moral substrate. Here we find the Bodhisattva vows. No longer is it enough to prepare oneself for Buddhahood. Now the question is, what are we going to do with Buddhahood when we attain it? Or when you get within range of it. There are generally thought to be 4 Bodhisattva vows. They exist in a number of subtle variations, and once you get to translation, the number of variations increases, obviously. No, but would you like to hear what that sounds like when it's chanted? Okay. All beings without number, I vow to liberate endless blind passions. I vow to uproot dharma gates beyond measure. I vow to penetrate the great way of Buddha. I vow to attain. Now you can hear that being chanted in temples, China, Japan, Korea. So what just happened here? Well, first of all, I sneaked the religion's observance into an academic conference. But what did I just do there? I took a vow just now to liberate you. And I don't care how long it takes, because I don't think anybody here is a Buddhist, so you're going to be tough nuts to crack. So I'm going to have to come back in the next incarnation and the next. And I don't care if it takes me 1,000,000 years, I'm going to drag every one of you into enlightenment and nirvana. So that takes Buddhist ethics to a whole new level.
It does.
Here one undertakes to use whatever one has gained in one's training and to single-handedly bring all of creation to Buddhahood, regardless of how long it takes. And in a tradition that believes in reincarnation, that can be a very long time indeed. So we've moved from trainee morality to the morality of heroism. Of course, you can have doubts about the reality of multiple lives, but that takes nothing away from the grandeur of this aspiration. So, you know, when you write the paper, you have to put in at least one direct quote, so this is mine. Perhaps the most striking feature of the Indian Mahayana Buddhist moral tradition is its conception of the Bodhisattva, who vows with infinite compassion to remain in samsara, the world, for endless lives, to work for the benefit of all sentient beings. There's a sense in which this Buddhist saint's commitment transcends his theistic counterparts, who after all will shortly enter heaven and receive their eternal reward. The Bodhisattva has no such respite. In fact, many of his rebirths are fraught with sacrifice, including giving up limbs and even his life during the development of full Buddhahood. His vow is among the most remarkable ethical aspirations in the history of human thought. Unquote. Now, perhaps we only have one life to live. Yeah. Take a secular point of view. This is it. Now, 10, 20 years ago, from now, I will no longer be around to actually fulfill my vow. But if your intention was to work for others for all eternity, can we deny that this is a profoundly moral point of view? Now, I've chosen the Mahayana vows as the clearest example of this shift in Buddhist morality. But this is not a sectarian division. Even in earlier forms of Buddhism, we see an emphasis on the Buddha's decision to teach, to devote the rest of his life to the enlightenment of others, rather than just basking in his personal achievement. So different schools of Buddhism have tended to emphasize one of the two levels over the other one in practice, but both are always present to some degree. For example, there's this one story from the Buddhist scriptures. Monk was sitting in the jungle, meditating. And these stories always take place in the jungle because 2,500 years ago, India was still covered in jungle. Not much of it left. And so a tigress and her cubs came up, and they were starving. They were barely able to move. And so there already was a tradition of Buddhist monks in the jungle being eaten by tigers. So the monk was filled with compassion. He said to the tiger, "Take me, and live and feed your cubs." The tiger was too weak to even kill him, so he opened up a vein and let her lick for his blood until the tiger was not strong enough to kill him and eat him. Now, I've always wondered who exactly wrote up that story. Where were the witnesses to get all that level of detail? But the idea of self-sacrifice for others is in that story, and it has inspired people for centuries. So, let's get back to proper academic analysis. The first level, the trainee morality, is roughly equivalent to Aristotelian virtue ethics, which we're going to hear a lot more about tomorrow. It's not identical. Even Damien Keown, the foremost proponent of Buddhist ethics as virtue ethics, has to admit that out of Aristotle's 4 cardinal virtue, the second one, justice, is just conspicuously absent. But still, there is a bit of a family resemblance there. The second level, however, is not classifiable in terms of ethical philosophy. It is a religious rather than a philosophical ethical response. It's not utilitarian ethic, where it vows to take care of all living beings, not merely the greatest possible number. Okay, so now we have a basic idea. Let's take a 10 million year step back and consider what we can make of this in the light of modern scientific knowledge. And this is where I walk into dangerous territory. Now we start off in Africa, which is covered from west to east in thick forest. A variety of primates scamper about in the branches. They're omnivorous, robbing birds' nests and catching small animals when they can, but mainly they eat fruit. What happens to this tropical idyll? Climate change. Africa itself starts to break apart. The Great Rift Valley starts to form, creating deep valleys, high mountain ridges, and a string of long, deep lakes, forming barriers to migration that persist to the present. Further east, India slams into Asia, throwing up the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau. The result of this is that monsoon patterns change, and the eastern half of Africa starts to dry out. Over millions of years, the forest largely disappears and is replaced by grasslands and scrub savanna. So let's take a look at how 3 groups of primates responded to this. One group retained its ancestral lifestyle. Their descendants are still around, but they're largely restricted to the coastal fringes of the continent, where there's still something that looks like a forest. And we know them as vervet monkeys, blow-uppies. Another group did adapt to the dry, open conditions. They evolved into the dangerously open conditions of the savanna, what we might call the traditional way, by tightening their social cohesion and evolving considerably dangerous weapons. Fun fact, a male baboon has longer canine teeth than a leopard. Yeah, the baboons have done well for themselves. And the third group, of course, is us. Like the baboons, we expanded our already omnivorous diet to include more animal protein. First by scavenging, no doubt, and then later by actually going out and hunt. Unlike the baboons, we did not evolve offensive weaponry. We externalized our teeth and claws in the form of sharpened rocks and sticks. The human shoulder became a throwing machine without parallel in the animal kingdom. The end result of this was that we spread out of Africa to become the most widespread primate species. What baboons and humans have in common, though, is that both had to change their social structure. The happy-go-lucky structure of tree-dwelling fruit eaters no longer sufficed when a predator could see you from long distances. Both baboons and humans had to adopt a social setup that closely resembled those of lions, wolves, and African hunting dogs. Primates turned into social carnivores. It's my contention that any theory of morality that does not acknowledge this heritage is doomed from the outset. We divide labor roles like lions. Lions guard territory. Lionesses hunt. We form familial hierarchies like wolves. This is why we were able to domesticate wolves into dogs. They could just fit into our social structure. Even when forced into conglomerations of millions, we maintain small, close-knit social groups. And this is something I read some years ago. I'm still trying to track it down. They did a large survey, and they asked people, who are your friends? How many friends do you have? So they find it like, people you trust with your life, people that you can go at any time, day or night, they'll let you in. And the answer, some people were loners, some people were gregarious, some people had thousands of names in their address book, but when you ask them, who are your friends? The answer is always about 20 people. Universal. And that is exactly the size of a hunter-gatherer band. So these things are very deep and they're still with us. Even when gathered plants materials provided most of the nutrition, as always the case in hunter-gatherer groups, we really should change that to gatherer-hunter groups. Give the gatherers a bit of the spotlight. And even when an individual becomes a vegetarian, as I have, we can never shake off the heritage of millions of years of existence, of life in small bands of social carnivores. It's who we are, the way we experience the world. And this is the root of our ethical problem. In a given situation, do we obey the social or the carnivorous aspects of our heritage? To a Buddhist, this is the root of our tendency to see reality in dualistic terms, ethical and unethical, good and evil. Meanwhile, the situation itself is neither. It is what it is. We always have the choice to see through either of these lenses, or more likely through both simultaneously to varying degrees. Morality at its best emphasizes the social aspect at the expense of the carnivorous. Morality at its worst does the exact opposite. Now, it's like what Reinhold Niebuhr said about religion. Religion makes good people better and bad people worse. From the Buddhist perspective, the role of religion is not to boost either the social or the carnivorous aspect. It is to discard both, however difficult that may be, and experience reality as it is. But have I not just said that we can never do that? Indeed, that is why Buddhas are so rare. I will conclude by showing how Buddhism would react to the famous trolley problem. You thought you would get a whole day without the trolley problem? Come on, this is a morality conference. Now we've all seen it. There's a trolley track that splits in two with a lever that decides which way the trolley will go. On the left-hand track, there's a person tied up. On the right-hand track, there are 4 persons tied up. Which way do you pull the lever and why? The answer to this question supposedly uncovers the ethical theory to which you subscribe. Then you can start to change the variables. What if that person is more valuable to society? And what if there's a child in one of the 4? So as a Buddhist, I have serious problems with this thought experiment. Well, first of all, it's never stated if there are people inside the trolley who can also be injured. Well, let's just suppose it's empty. More comprehensively, what kind of world is it where people are tied up on trolley tracks, ready to be run over? What kind of world is it in which this is even a suitable example for a thought experiment? What can we do to eliminate the trolley problem even as a possibility, even as a thought experiment? The trolley problem is ethics seen from the carnivorous rather than the social aspect of our existence, where doing less harm is prioritized over doing good. So let's play the game. Give a Buddhist answer to the trolley problem. In fact, I'll give you 2. Both involve playing the game by not playing it, by refusing to accept the rules. The first response is to do nothing, to leave the course of the trolley to chance. Or if you prefer religious language, leave it to the karma of the tied up people. This is the approach of the Pacceka Buddha, the silent Buddha who knows but does not teach. It is not a situation where one is petrified into immobility, but a principled decision not to play the game. To pull the lever and save 4 people does not outweigh or remove the karmic effects of having killed the one. By doing nothing, the karmic effects remain with those who tied the people up and sent the trolley on its way. And that is a valid response in Buddhist ethics. Here's a second one. The second response is to throw yourself on the track before it splits, sacrificing yourself for the benefit of the 5 tied up people. This is the Buddhist ethic of heroism, the final victory of the social over the carnivorous. But both are valid Buddhist moral responses. In the recorded life of the Buddha, we can see both in action. The Buddha went to great lengths to prevent a war between 2 rival states over the right to dam a small stream. But when the empire of Kasala was about to annex the northern city-states, including his own city of Kapilavastu, he did nothing. The time of the city-states was over. The incorporation into a larger empire was inevitable, and Buddhas do not fight against inevitability. Instead, he advised the royal minister Vasakara to conduct the planned annexation in such a way that it would be relatively bloodless but still have the desired effect. So the issue of the morality of war has been a key issue in Buddhism ever since. So in one case, he went to great trouble to prevent a war from ever happening. And in the other case, he said, this war is inevitable. Let's have it as bloodless as we can. And of course, we can see examples of the ethics of heroism elsewhere in the history of religions. We see it in the self-sacrifice of Jesus. In the Buddhist analysis, it does not matter if he rose on the 3rd day. It does not matter if his death actually saved the world from damnation. his sincere belief and intention that this was the case, that his excruciating death would save the entire world, is what makes this a heroic ethical act worthy of any bodhisattva. A few centuries later, however, we see Christians going out of their way to antagonize the Roman authorities and be martyred. To the Buddhists, this is a little bit more questionable. Did they do this to secure their own place in the afterlife, or was it for the sake of others? However, we do not always have time for long philosophical ruminations about ethical actions. An ethical situation presents itself and an action is needed right now. How do we know what to do in a split second? This is where the ethics of training comes in. Years of training in conventionally ethical behavior, coupled with years of clearing the mind of irrelevant distractions, readies the person to make the correct decision when the time to decide arrives. What that decision will be cannot be predicted. It will be made when the situation arises and not a millisecond before. And so, while we see that day-to-day moral life in Buddhist society doesn't really differ much, the underlying ethical thinking, the reasons given for acting morally are uniquely Buddhist. And that is my paper. Questions, comments, verbal abuse?
Thank you, Michel. Any questions or comments? Yes, please.
Thank you. It was a lovely presentation. I just think that based on the presentation, for example, you make mention of China, Japan, and Korea. Just from a general presentation of the paper, it seemed very strongly that you were speaking about the Chinese Buddhism and their understanding of morality, with very little attention given to the country, the birth of Buddhism, India and Indian Buddhism, and how that affects a Buddhist understanding of morality. So I wouldn't necessarily suggest that there's a unilateral homogeneous understanding of morality in Buddhism. For example, the notion of morality put forth was one of very nice, peaceful, cohesive understanding of morality, which if you look, for example, in the Tamilian or Sri Lanka, you have a very violent side of Buddhism, which is Sinhalese Buddhism, which is part of the ongoing violent situation between Tamil people and Sinhalese people. So just more of a contemporary understanding and even variant thoughts of morality in a more far Asian Buddhism versus more closer Asian Buddhism that being of the Indian subcontinent, including Sri Lanka.
Well, the first level of which ethics that I identified actually comes from Theravada. So that would be more from the Southeast Asian, from Thailand and Sri Lanka as well. Yeah, look, if we're going to say, but these people are not living this in reality, right? Then, well, we can say that of all religions. You know, Christians, I mean, I deeply respect Jesus Christ. I'm not too sure about his fan club all the time. You can say that about anybody. And or in your own case, is the current Indian government living out the ethics of the Bhagavad Gita? They claim to, but so yeah, it's a conference like this is always going to be at the philosophical, theological level, and I have yet to see any religion that, given time, given power, lives up to uh, its own ideals. Well, the Baha'is, but they haven't been around very long and they haven't got power. Put them in charge of a country and see how they do. Jains, again, aren't very many of them. And but yes, all the major religions fall short of their own ideals.
Thank you. Any other questions, perhaps? Yes, please.
I think it's safe to say that most of the tension that we have between the religions today is because of they are in competition with one another, especially with regard to the universal message of observation. Now, and therefore that you have a lot of intolerance, and you also absolutize your own views as absolutely right, and those others are false, and so on. Now, it seems to me that you are also saying that the Buddhist religion also proclaims a sort of universal message of observation, enlightenment that everyone should have. But what does that mean now in terms of toleration over against other religions, and the willingness to admit that they also, with regard to the ethical message, could have views that are valid?
Buddhists are much sneakier than you can imagine. When you go to your Christian heaven, I'm still supposed to come and fetch you and take you to Nirvana. So Buddhists try to be even more universal than anybody else. Try to be nice about it. And so, yes, if you have different universal claims, then you either have to say, well, they are incompatible, and therefore we make like Abraham Kuyper, you live in your sphere and I live in my sphere, and never talk to each other. Or you can try and find I won't say higher, but a way to understand one another that takes away the worst of the contradictions. And I think we are on our way there. We've started it. These are things that take centuries, but most of us no longer think that it's necessary to kill somebody else because people of what they believe. Okay, there are exceptions to that. I don't think I would give this paper in Iran or Saudi Arabia. But we have moved mostly to the point where we can say, well, I think that paper in front of me is wrong, but yeah, I can see where he's coming from. And where his tradition is. And so, at least for us here in these rarefied intellectual circles, we seem to be managing. Out on the street, it's always more volatile.
Good. Thank you. We have 5 more minutes for last question. Let's make it 2 questions. Oh, sorry, you don't have your hand raised. So 1, 2, 3 questions. Thank you.
Yeah, you mentioned something, if I'm just going to be specific, I want to ask this in the context of marriage. When you say, do not smoke, do not kill, keep this in your pants. So my question is on marriage. Is marriage allowed in Buddhism? Or if we say keep it in the pants, or what we are saying in what context? After marriage or not? If you can answer that.
Okay, so that was first pronounced in a specific social environment, right? And it took this form of a list of women that you're not allowed to have sex with. If you're a monk, all of them. But if you're not a monk, then a woman who's married to somebody else, a woman who's not married but still under her father's protection. Right? So that didn't leave much in the society of the time. Right? But marriage, yes, marriage exists in Buddhist countries. It does not exist in Buddhism. It's not a sacrament in Buddhism. You know, in the last 100 years in Sri Lanka, Buddhist monks have started just being there at the marriage ceremony. They don't do anything, they don't officiate, they just sit there and sort of bless the proceedings by their presence. This was considered a scandal because in traditional Buddhist countries up to 100 years ago, marriage was a transaction between 2 families. Not so much between 2 people, between 2 families. And the religious establishment was not supposed to interfere with that. And so, yeah, it was not a question of Buddhism saying that this is our theory of marriage and we will officiate at the marriage. No, it was a question of we recognize that there's an existing secular law, secular custom, and that you know, this should be respected. That answer your question?
I see our time is up, but I know there might be more questions, so perhaps over lunch you're more than welcome to ask your question. And so thank you, Michel Clasquin, for your paper, and thank you for enlightening us.